Chapter 30 of The Glory of the Conquered by Susan Glaspell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Matt Ferrard. Chapter 30. Eyes for Two. "This day smells as though it had been made in the country," Karl said, leaning from the dining room window, which Ernestine had thrown wide open as she rose from the breakfast table. "Yes, and it looks that way," she responded, leaning out herself and taking a long draught of the spring. "Let's take a walk," he said abruptly. "Except when you asked me to marry you, you never proposed a more delightful thing," she responded with gayer laugh than he had heard for a long time. "Suppose we walk down through the park and take a look at the lake," he suggested. "I call that a genuine inspiration," losing no time in getting Karl's things and her own. Nothing could have pleased her more than this. It seemed beginning the spring right. "I can fancy we are in Europe," he said, after they had gone a little way, and she laughed understandingly. This seemed closer to the spirit of the old days than they had come for a long time. Her guiding hand was on his arm, but more as if she liked to have it there than as though necessary. "Your little finger could pilot me through Hades," he said, lovingly, gratefully, as a light touch told him of a step to go down, and again she laughed. It was very easy to laugh this morning. The winter, full of hard things for them both, had gone now, and spring, as is spring's way, held promise. In the laboratory they no longer treated Ernestine with mere courteous interest. That day in December when she went down to Dr. Parkman's operation had marked a change. Since then there had been a light ahead, a light which shed its rays down the path she must go. What did it matter if she were a little stupid about this or that, if Mr. Beeson was unconsciously rude, or Mr. Willard consciously polite? For she knew now. And did anything matter save the final things? With her own feeling of its not mattering, their attitude had seemed to change. She became more as one of them. She was quick to get that difference. "You're arriving on the high speed," Dr. Parkman had assured her when he visited the laboratory a few days before. So she knew why she was happy, for added to all that was it not a glorious and propitious thing that Karl felt like taking a walk? Did it not argue a new interest in life, a new determination not to be shut off from it? And Karl, why did he too seem to feel that the spring held new and better things? Was it just the call of spring, or did Karl sense the good things ahead? Could it be that her soul, unable to contain itself longer, had whispered to his that new days were coming? Why, even a fellow on his way to the penitentiary for a life would have to get some enjoyment out of this morning, he said, after they had stood still for a minute to listen to the song of a bird, and had caught the sweetness of a flowering tree. "And oh, Karl," she laughed joyously, "you're not on your way to the penitentiary for life." "No," he said, and he seemed to be speaking to something within himself rather than to her. "I'm not." They had reached Jackson Park, and sat down for a little rest before they should wend their way onto the lake. "Oh, Ernestine," he said, taking it in long breaths, feeling the dew upon his face, and hearing the murmur of many living things. "Tell me about it, dear. I want to see it too." "Karl, every tree looks as though it were just as glad as we are. Can't you feel that the trees feel just as we do about things? The leaves haven't all come out yet. Some of them are holding themselves within themselves in a coy little way they have, although intending all the time to come out just as fast as ever they can. And it's that glorious, unspoiled green, the kind nature uses to make painters feel foolish. Oh, nature's having much fun with the painters this morning. Right over there," pointing with his finger, "is such a beautiful tree. I like it because all of its branches did not go in the way they were expected to go. Several of them were very perverse children, who Mother Trunk thought at one time were going to ruin her life. But you know lives aren't so easily ruined, after all. "Now you go right up there at an angle of 22 degrees," she said to her eldest child. "Not at all," said the firstborn. "I intend to lean right over here at whatsoever angle will best express my individuality." And though the mother grieved for a long time, she knows now, Karl, how foolish we are. But listen. You hear that bird who is trying to get all of his soul into his throat at once? He's way up there on the top branch, higher than everything else, and so pleased and proud that he is, and he's singing to a little blue cloud straight above him. And I tell you I never saw such blue within blue. Its outside dress is a very filmy blue, but that's made over an underdress of deeper blue. And there's just a little part in it where you can see right into the heart, and that's a blue so deep and rich it makes you want to cry. And oh, Karl, the heart itself has opened a little now, and you can get a suggestion, just a very indefinite suggestion, but then all inner things are indefinite, that inside the heart of the cloud is its soul, and you are permitted one fleeting glimpse to tell you that the soul of the cloud is such a blue as never was dreamed of on land or on sea. "I can see that cloud," he said, "and the bird looking up at it, and the tree whose eldest child was so perverse and so individual. And Karl," she went on in joyous eagerness, "can't you see how the earth heaved a sigh right here a couple of 100 centuries ago? Now don't tell me the park commissioners made them. And that when it settled back from its sigh it never was quite the same again? It was a sigh of content, for the little slopes are so gentle. Gentle little hills are sighs of content, and bigger ones are determinations. And mountains, what are mountains, Karl?" "Mountains are revolutionary instincts," he said, smiling at her fancifulness. Ernestine was always fanciful when she was happy. "Yes, that's it. Sometimes I like the stormy upheavals which change the whole face of the earth. But this morning it's nice to have just the little sighs of content. And, dear, now turn around and look this way. You can't really see the lake at all, but you can tell by looking down that way that it is there." "How can you tell, Liebchen?" he asked, just to hear her talk. "Oh, I don't know how you can. It's not scientific knowledge. It's the other kind. The trees know that the lake is there." "Let's walk down to the lake," he said. "I want to feel it on my face. And oh, Liebchen, it's good to have you tell about things like this." As they walked, she told him of all she saw, the people they met, and what she was sure the people were thinking about. Once she laughed aloud, and when he asked what she was laughing at, she said, "Oh, that chap we just passed was amusing. His eyes were saying, 'My allowance is all gone and I haven't a red sou. But isn't it a bully day?'" "There's no reason why I should be shut out from the world, Ernestine," he said vigorously, "when you have eyes for two." "Why, that's just what I think," she said, quickly, her voice low, and her heart beating fast. The shadows upon the grass, the nursemaids and the babies, the boys and girls playing tennis, or just strolling around happy to be alive, she could make Karl see them all. And as they came in sight of the lake, she began telling him how it looked in the distance, how it seemed at first just a cloud dropped down from the sky, but how, upon coming nearer, it was not the stuff that clouds are made of, but a live thing, a great live thing pulsing with joy in the morning sunshine. She told him how some of it was blue, and some of it was green, while some of it was blue wedded to green, and some of it too elusive to have anything to do with the spectrum. "And, dearie, it is flirting with the sunlight, flirting shamefully. I'm almost ashamed for the lake, only it's so happy in its flirtation that perhaps it is not bothered with moral consciousness. But it seems to want the sunlight to catch it, and then it seems to want to get away, and sometimes a sunbeam gets a little wave that stayed too long and kisses it right here in open day. And isn't it awful? But isn't it nice?" In so many ways she told how the lake seemed to her, how it seemed to her eyes, and how it seemed to her heart, and how it seemed to her soul, how it looked, what it said, what it meant, what the clouds thought of it, and what the sunlight thought of it, what the wind thought of it, what the dear babies on the shore thought of it, and what it thought of itself. She could not have talked that way to anyone else, but it was so easy for her heart to talk to Karl's heart. One pair of eyes could do just as well as two when hearts were tuned like this. And then, when she did not feel like talking any more, they stood there and learned many things from the voice of the lake itself. "Ernestine," he said, when they turned from it at last, "it seems to me I never saw Lake Michigan quite so well before." End of chapter 30. Chapter 31 of The Glory of the Conquered by Susan Glaspell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Matt Perard. Chapter 31. Science and Superscience. Insubordinate children who play off from school in the morning must work in the afternoon, Karl said at luncheon, and they went to their work that afternoon with freshened spirit. When the McCormicks gave up their flat at Christmas time, Beeson had come to live with the Hubers. Ernestine prided herself upon some cleverness in having rented 2 rooms without Karl suspecting it was a matter of renting the rooms. When he engaged Ross as his secretary in the fall, she said it would be more convenient for them all for Mr. Ross to have his room there. They had an extra room, so why not? She did not put it the other way, that she felt the house more expensive than they should have now. Of course Karl would make money in his books. That had been settled in advance. But things had changed for them, and Ernestine felt the need of caution. Then, as to Beeson, she said there was that little room he could have, and it would do the boy good to be there. "You like John," she said to Karl, "and as he has not yet been graduated into philosophy, he may be more companionable than Mr. Ross." And Karl said by all means to have Beeson, if it wouldn't bother her to have him around. She was glad of that for more reasons than a reduced rent. Beeson had become a great help to Ernestine. After he came there to live, they fitted up some things for her in the studio, and she managed to get in a number of extra hours when Karl thought she was busy with her pictures. In her glow of spirit this afternoon, that walk in the park had meant so much as holding promise for the future. Ernestine was even willing to admit, looking back upon it, that the winter had not been nearly so bad as one would suppose. Mr. Beeson and Mr. Ross were both, in their differing ways, alert and interesting, and there had been some good wrangles around the evening fire. Other people had found them out, and they had drawn to them an interesting group of friends. So the days had flowed steadily on, a brave struggle to meet life in good part, keep that good fellowship of the spirit. One of the hardest things of all had been deceiving Karl. Her reason justified it, but it hurt her heart. They had been able to do it, however, better than she would have believed possible. Mr. Ross was with him most of the time when she was not, and had frequently been forced to intercept some caller who was close to an innocent remark about Mrs. Hubers being over at the university. Several times Karl had caught the odor of the laboratory about her, and she had been forced to explain it as the odor of the studio. And more than once, in the midst of a discussion, her interest had beguiled her into some surprisingly intelligent remark, and she had been obliged to invent laughing reasons for knowing anything about it. It hurt her deeply to take advantage of Karl's blindness in keeping things from him, even though the motive was all love for Karl, and determination to help. She would be so glad when all that was over, and she thought as she worked along very hard that afternoon that perhaps it would not be many days now until Karl should know. That would be for Dr. Parkman to say. So many vital things seemed left to Dr. Parkman. "Did you ever think," she said, turning to Mr. Beeson, who was busy at the table beside her, "what the doctor really counts for in this world?" "Yes, in a way," said Beeson. adjusting his microscope. "But then I was never sick much." "Well, I didn't mean just taking one's pulse," she laughed. "It seems to me they mean more than prescriptions. For one thing, I think it's rather amusing the way they all practice Christian Science." "Why? What do you mean?" he demanded, aroused now, and shocked. "Oh, I've come to the conclusion that a modern first-class doctor is a Christian Scientist who preserves his sanity." She paused, laughing a little at Beason's bewildered face, and at the thought of how little her formula would be appreciated in either camp. "I've noticed it down at Dr. Parkman's office," she went on. "It's quite a study to listen to him at the telephone. He will wrangle around all sorts of corners to get patients to admit something is in better shape than it was yesterday. And though they called up to say they were worse, they end in admitting they are much better. He just forces them into saying something is better, and then he says, triumphantly, 'Oh, that's fine,' and the patient rings off immensely cheered up." "That's a kind of trickery, though," said Beason. "Pretty good kind of trickery, if it helps people get well." "Well, I shouldn't care to be a practicing physician," Beason declared, "just for that reason. That sort of business would be very distasteful to me." Ernestine was about to say something, and then relegated it to the things better left unsaid. But she permitted herself a wise little smile. "I don't think it's such an awfully high grade of work," he went on. "In a way it is, of course. But there's so much repetition and routine. So much that doesn't count scientifically at all, doesn't count for anything but the patient." "But what is science for?" she demanded, aggravated now. "Has medical science any value, save in its relation to human beings?" "Oh, yes, I know, in the end," he admitted vaguely. "All this laboratory work is simply to throw more power into the hands of the general practitioner. It's to give him more light. It's just because his work is so important that this work has any reason for being. Dr. Huber saw it that way," she concluded, with the air of delivering the unanswerable. "But even that wasn't just what I meant," she went on, after they had worked silently for a few minutes. "What I was thinking about was the super doctor." Beason simply stared. "No, not entirely crazy," she laughed. "For instance, what can a man do for nervous indigestion without infusing a little hope? Think of what doctors know, not only about people's bodies, but about their lives. Cause and effect overlap, don't they? Half the time a run-down body means a broken spirit, or a twisted life. How can you set part of a thing right when the whole thing of it's wrong? How can a doctor be just a doctor, if he's a good one?" But nothing super could be expected of Beason. His very blank face recalled her to the absurdity of getting out of focus with one's audience. She herself felt it strongly. It seemed to her that Dr. Parkman's real gift was his endowment in intuition. When all was going well she heard nothing from him, but let things begin to drag, and the doctor appeared, rich in resources. He seemed to have in reserve a wide variety of stimulants. He looked in upon them often. Whenever in their neighborhood he stopped, and though frequently he could not so much as take time to sit down, the day always went a little better for his coming. If the end of the world were upon us, Dr. Parkman could avert the calamity for a day or two, couldn't he, Karl? Ernestine had laughed after one of his visits. This proved to be one of the days of his stopping in, and he arrived just as Karl was dictating a few final sentences to Mr. Ross. While they were finishing, he said he was not in a hurry today. He took a keen look at Karl's face. His color was not good, the doctor thought. In fact, several things were not to his liking. Too many hard times with himself, he summed it up. Droopy, needs a bracer, needs to get back in the harness. That's the only medicine for him. He had been thinking about that very seriously of late. Ernestine was at least in position now to show the possibilities of the situation, and working with Karl would do more for her in a month Then working along this way would do in 5. Why not? No matter how long they waited, it was going to be hard at first. The deep lines in Karl's face furnished the strongest argument against further waiting. "What have we here?" he asked, picking up one of the embossed books lying open on the table near Karl. "I presume that's my Bible," Karl replied. "Has it come to this?" the doctor asked dryly. "Didn't we ever tell you the story of my Bible?" "No, you never did. I never suspected you had one." "Oh, yes. The Bible was the first book of this sort I had. It was sent to me by some home missionary society, some woman's organization." "Fools," broke in Parkman. "They saw in the paper about my eyes, and so they said to themselves, 'Now here is a good chance to convert one of those ungodly scientists.' So they sent the Bible along with a nice little note saying that now I would have time to read it, and perhaps all of this time was the hand of God leading me. You can construct the rest. Well," he paused with a laugh, "Ernestine was mad." "I should hope so," growled Parkman. "She was so divinely angry that in having fun with her I overlooked being enraged myself. Oh, if I could only give you any idea of how incensed she was! I think she intended notifying the Chicago police. Really, I don't know to what lengths she would have gone had it not been for my restraining influence. And then she constructed a letter. It was a masterpiece, I can tell you that. She compared me to them, greatly to their disadvantage. She spoke of the various kinds of religious manifestation, again greatly to their disadvantage." "Did she send it?" laughed the doctor. "No, I persuaded her that well-intentioned people should receive the same kindly tolerance we extend to the mentally defective. The writing of the letter in itself halfway contented her. It was such a splendid expression of her emotions. Poor old girl," he added musingly, "she was feeling pretty sore about things just then. But the sequel is the queer part," he went on. "I began to read their Bible, and I like it. It's part of the irony of fate that I haven't gotten from it the things they intended I should. But I tell you part of this Old Testament is immense reading. You know, Parkman, I suppose we're prejudiced ourselves. We don't see the Bible as it is itself. We see it in relation to a lot of people who surround it. And because we don't care for some of them, we think we shouldn't care for it. Whereas the thing in itself," he concluded cheerfully, "is just what we'd like." "And how go your own books?" Dr. Parkman asked him. Karl shrugged one shoulder in a nervous little way he had acquired. "Oh, so-so. Pretty fair, I guess." His face settled into a gloom then, but almost immediately he roused himself from it to say, in a voice more cheerful than spontaneous, "They'll be finished in a couple of weeks. I'm both glad and sorry. Don't know just what I'll go at then." Again he seemed to settle into the gloom which the doctor could see was ever there waiting to receive him. But again he roused himself almost immediately. Was it this way with the man all the time? A continuous fight against surrendering? "But I'm mighty thankful I've had the books," he said. "They've pulled me through the winter, and they've enabled me to make a living. Lord, but a man would hate not to make a living," he concluded, straightening up a trifle, more like the Karl of old. The sheer pathos of it had never come home to the doctor as it did with that. A man who should have stood upon the very mountain peaks of fame, now proudly claiming that he was able to make a living. But if it brought home the pathos of the situation, it also brought new sense of the manhood of Karl Hubers. It was great, Parkman told himself, great. A man who felt within himself all the forces which make for greatness, could force himself into the place of the average man, and thank the Lord that he was able to make a living. "Here's a little scheme I've worked out," Karl said, and opening one of the drawers of the library table, pulled out the model for the idea he had worked out for reading and writing in Braille. It was the first Dr. Parkman had heard of it.
He wanted to know all about it, and Karl explained how it had seemed to him as soon as he learned how the blind read and wrote that the thing could be simplified and vastly improved. So he had worked this out. He explained its points of difference, and wanted to know what Parkman thought of it. "Why, man," exclaimed the doctor, "it strikes me you've revolutionized the whole business. But why, Karl, nobody ever thought of this before?" "The usual speech," laughed Karl. "But in this case it seems so confoundedly true." "Well, I believe it will help some, and I'll be glad of that," he added simply. "Oh, I have some more schemes. If I've got to be blind, I'm going to make blindness a better business." "Our old friend the devil didn't do so well then, after all," said Dr. Parkman quietly. "He closed up one channel, but he didn't figure on your burrowing another." Karl laughed. "Huh! This won't worry him much. It came so easily I can't think it amounts to a great deal. But as long as I was used to scheming things out, it amused me. Exercised a few cells that were in pretty bad need of a job. And I have other ideas," he repeated. Parkman asked what Karl intended to do with his model, offering some suggestions. The doctor was more than interested and pleased. He was deeply stirred. "Why, confound the fellow," he was saying to himself. "They can't knock him out. They knock him down in one place and he bobs up in another. The ideas of this brain were as difficult to suppress as certain other things in nature. Dam up one place, they find another." They smoked their cigars and talked intermittently then. They were close enough together to be silent when they chose. And all the while the undercurrent of Dr. Parkman's thought flowed steadily on. He was thinking that after all there were better things to do with fate than damn it. If ever a man would seem justified in spending his soul in the damning of fate, that man, it seemed to him, was the friend beside him. And while he had done some of it, perhaps a great deal more than any one knew, it had not been his master passion. His master passion had been to press on to be knew not what. There was the glory of it. It was easy enough to work toward a goal sighted ahead, but it took a Karl Hubers to work on through the darkness. And there was a good time coming. The doctor's somber face relaxed to a smile. His own life seemed almost worth living now, just because he had been able to take a hand. Yes, and play a few good cards in this little game. Those things Karl had shown him today made it seem there was all the finer joy in bringing him back to the things which were his own. He had been thrust from out the gates, but he had not sat whimpering outside the wall. He had gone on and sought to find a place in that outer world in which he found himself. And now he should come back to his own through gates of glory. Karl asked him about Ernestine then. How was she looking? Was she thin, pale? Her face felt pale to him, he said. He had urged her to work, because he knew she would be happier so, but Parkman must see to it she did not overwork. Had he seen the picture on which she was working so hard? He asked that wistfully, and the doctor's face was soft, and a gentleness crept into his voice, and as he said, he believed he was to see the great picture very soon now. And then, after a silence, Karl said, softly, very tenderly, "Bless her gamey little heart." End of chapter 31. Chapter 32 of The Glory of the Conquered by Susan Glaspell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Matt Perard. Chapter 32. The Doctor Has His Way. It was in response to the doctor's telephone message that Ernestine went down to his office one afternoon a few days later. Dr. Parkman had been detained at the hospital, they told her, but would be there very soon, and so she sat down in the waiting room, which was already well filled. Were there always people there waiting for him? And did they not sometimes grow impatient and want to find a doctor who would not keep them waiting so long? The woman sitting near her looked friendly, and so she asked, "Don't you get very tired waiting for Dr. Parkman?" "Oh, yes," sighed the woman, "very tired." "Then why don't you go to some doctor who would attend to you more quickly?" she pursued, moved chiefly by the desire to see what would happen. The woman stared, grew red, and replied frigidly, "Because I do not wish to." All the other patients were staring at Ernestine too. "Why don't you do that yourself?" asked a large woman with a sick-looking small boy. "I guess if there was anything much the matter with you, you'd be willing to wait," said a pale woman with a weary voice. And then a man, she was sure that the man was a victim of cancer, said loftily, "A doctor you never have to wait for isn't the doctor you want." "The only thing seems queer to me," said a meek-looking woman, taking advantage of the outbreak, "is that he don't look at your tongue. Down in Indiana, where I come from, they always look at your tongue. There's a lot of questions he don't ask," she ventured, looking around for either assent or information. "He asks all there's any need of," the first woman assured her. "I guess you aren't very sick," turning witheringly to Ernestine. And then they went back to their waiting, those who had rocking chairs rocking, those who had magazines reading, or turning leaves at least, some just sitting there and looking into space. It must take away all sense of freedom to feel that people like this, sick people for whom everything was hard, were always waiting for one. She would tell the doctor how she had been well nigh mobbed by loyal patients. They were like a great family. She knew well enough they did considerable grumbling, but her remark put her without the fold, and from her, as an alien, criticism was not to be brooked. By the glare with which the first woman still regarded her, she was sure she was suspected of being an agent sent there by some inferior doctor to try and get Dr. Parkman's patients away from him. Ernestine was tired, and she believed she would have to admit that she was nervous. She had been working harder, she supposed, than she should, but the further she went, the more she saw to do, and something from within was eternally pushing her on. As she waited, her mind turned to the stories that office must hold. How much of anxiety and suffering and sorrow and tragedy and occasional joy it must know. The mothers who brought children whom others had declared incurable, how tense these moments of waiting must be for them. The husband and wife who came together to find out whether she would have to have the operation. How many of the crucial moments of life were lived in such places as this? The power in these doctors vested, the power of their voice, their slightest glance, in holding men from the brink of despair. Who could know the human heart better than they? They did not meet the everyday men and women, well groomed with restraints and pretense. For it was an hour when the soul was stripped bare that the doctor looked in upon it. Men were various things to various people, but to the doctor they came very close to being themselves. Too much was at stake to dissemble here. When phantoms of fear and death took shape in the shadows, one sought the doctor and told the truth. She had a fancy which moved her then. She saw the men like Dr. Parkman fighting darkness down in the valley, while from the mountain peak adjacent men like Karl turned on, as with mighty searchlights, more and ever more of the light. And what were the searchlights for if not to be turned down into the valley? "What time did you go to bed last night?" he demanded, after they had shaken hands in the inner office. "Why, did you see the light?" she faltered. She had made a promise against late hours. "The light? No, but I see your face now, and that's enough. Was it two, or worse?" "Just a mere trifle worse. And truly, doctor, I didn't mean to, but But don't you know it's hard to stop when you feel just right for a thing? Why, one can't always do things at the proper time," she expostulated. "No, and one can't always keep an abused nervous system from going to pieces either. Did you ever stop to think of that? But you'll look after the nervous system," she replied ingenuously. "Now that's where a lot of you make the mistake. I can't do anything at all without the cooperation of common sense." "Well, I'm intending to be real good from this on," she laughed. "But it is so important that I know everything." He laughed then, too. "A very destructive notion." "Tell me," he said, when he had settled himself in his chair in the particular way of settling himself when he intended having a talk with her, "have you been rewarded in all this by any pleasure in it whatsoever? I don't mean," he made clear, anticipating her, "just the pleasure of doing something for Karl. But has your work given you any enthusiasm for the thing in itself?" "Doctor, it has. And that was something I was afraid of. But you should have heard me talking to Mr. Ross the other day when he made one of his patronizing remarks about mere science. I believe that when you work hard at almost anything, you develop some enthusiasm for it." A rather doubtful compliment for science." "It was rather Beesonish," she laughed. "But you see in the beginning my face was turned the other way." He gave her one of those concentrated glances then. "And how about that? Never feel any more like heading the other way?" She smiled, and the smile seemed to be covering a great deal. "Oh, sometimes the perverse side of me feels like turning the other way. There are many sides to us, aren't there? But never mind about that," she hastened. "That is just something between me and myself. I can suppress all insurrections." There was a pause. She leaned back in the big chair and was resting. He had seen from the first that she was very tired. "No desire to back out?" He threw that out a little doubtfully. She sat up straight. She looked, first angry, and then as if she were going to cry. "Doctor, tell me, am I that unconvincing? Hasn't the winter—" "This winter," he interrupted gently, "has proved that you knew what you were talking about when you came to me last fall. Could I say more than that? I only asked the question," he explained, "because this is the last chance for retreat." And then he told her, watching the changing expressions of her responsive face. But at the last there was a timidity, a sort of frightened fluttering. "But, doctor, am I ready? Can I really do it? There is so much I don't know." "The consciousness of which is excellent proof of your progress. My idea is this. In any case it is going to be hard at the first. You might go on another year, and of course be in better shape. But I don't know just what Karl would be doing in that year. He's in need of a big rousing up. And as for you, after working the year with him, you'll be a long way ahead of where you would be alone. So it argues itself that way from both standpoints. I made up my mind when I was out the other day that Karl needs just what this is going to give." "You think he looks badly?" She flew at that, relinquishing all else. "You think Karl's not well?" "I didn't mean that. But he needs the hope, the enthusiasm, activity. This is going to give." "Hasn't he been splendid this winter?" she asked softly, those very deep warm lights in her eyes. "Did you ever see anything like it, doctor?" "I thought I knew something about courage," he replied shortly. "But Karl makes me think I didn't." "I don't believe there are many men could turn from big things to smaller ones and grow bigger instead of smaller," she said, with a very tender pride. "They say scientists are narrow and bull-headed. Wonder what they would say to this? And there's another thing to remember. We have seen the results of the victories. Only Karl Hubers knows of the fights." "I know of some of them," said Ernestine simply. "Yes," he corrected himself. "You. And before we quite deify Karl we must reckon with you. He could not have done it without you." "He would not have tried," she said, and the man turned away. That look was not his to see. When she recalled herself, it was with a sense of not having been kind. Why did she say things like that to Dr. Parkman after Karl had told her? "And you, doctor," she said in rather timid reparation, "I wonder if you know what you have done for us both?" "Oh, I haven't counted for much," he said almost curtly. "It would have worked itself out without me." But even as he spoke he was wishing with all his heart that there was some way of showing her what they had meant to him. He did not do it, for a soul which has been long apart grows fearful of sending itself out, fearful of making itself absurd. They talked it all out then, going at practical things in a very matter-of-fact way. "And now," said the doctor, "I have a suggestion. It is more than a suggestion. It is a request. A little more than a request, even a—" "Command?" She smiled at him. "You know," he began, "how it is with the athletes. Sometimes they become overtrained, which is the worst thing could happen to them. A good trainer never puts overtrained men in the game. Now, my dear, enthusiastic friend," she was looking at him in that intent way of hers, "I've noticed 2 or 3 times that you've about jumped out of your chair at some meaningless noise in the other room. Your eyes tell the story. Oh, there are various ways of reading it. You're a little overtrained. Before you tell Karl the great secret, I want you to go away by yourself for a couple of weeks and rest." "You mean that I should leave Karl?" she demanded. "I do. I want you to have change, rest. And for that matter, a little lonesomeness wouldn't be a bad thing. You'll be in just the right mood then to put it all to him when you come back. He'll be in just the right mood to take it." "Oh, but doctor, you don't understand. I can't leave Karl. There are things I do for him no one else could do. Why, you must remember, he's blind," she concluded passionately. She was not easy to win, but he stated his case, and one by one met her arguments. Yes, Karl would be lonely, but when she came back he would be so glad to see her that he would be a much better subject for enthusiasm than he was now. She also would be in better mood. "If you tell him now," he said, "and he makes some objections, says it can't be done, 10 to 1, as you are now, you will begin to cry. A nice termination for your whole winter's work! You must go to him just as you came to me in the beginning. Overwhelm him, take him whether or no. And you're not right for that now. It's just because I'm bound this thing shall go through, that I insist you do as I say." "Couldn't Karl go with me?" she asked, quite humbly, her eyes pleading eloquently. He showed her, kindly but very decisively, that that would not make the point at all. There followed then but a few final protestations. Where would Karl think she was? What in the world would he think of her, going away and leaving him like that? Who would look after him? What if he needed some help he didn't get? Suppose he grew so lonesome and depressed he just couldn't stand it? On all of which points he somewhat banteringly reassured her. Other men had been lonesome now and then, and it had not quite killed them. Beason and Ross were in the house, and there was a good maid who adored Dr. Hubers. "As to where he thinks you are, I'll tell him half the truth, that you are a little nervous, and I have prescribed change and rest." But she would not agree to that. "Karl would worry," she said. "We'll tell him instead that I have to go to New York to see about my picture. It will be easier for Karl if he thinks it is about my work." He yielded to her judgment in that, and agreed to the further compromise that if she found she could not possibly stay away 2 weeks, she might come back in one. It was the change, the going away, the getting lonesome the doctor wanted most of all. He wanted to lift her clear up to her highest self, that she might have all that was hers to give when she told her story to Karl. "And of course, doctor," she asked anxiously. "When the time comes you will talk to him too. Tell him you feel I can do it?" "Trust me for that," he said briefly. "But where is it I am to go?" she laughed, as she was ready to leave. He told her then of a place in Michigan. An old nurse of his had married and was living there, and he frequently sent patients to her as boarders. "I have written to her and she wants you to come," he said. "Well, upon my word! Before I so much as said I would go?" "Why, certainly," he answered, looking a trifle surprised. "For 3 days, perhaps 5. I want you to sleep. You'll find her very tired, once you let go. Then you can walk in the woods. I think it's going to be warm enough for browsing around. And you can think of Karl," he said with a touch of humor and a touch of something else, "and of all this is going to mean. I've thought a great many times of what you said about the statue. There's something mighty stirring in that idea of unconquerableness." "There is," she responded. "A great thing, you know, is worth making a few sacrifices for. You've made some pretty big ones for this. Now make this one more. Haven't you been laying claim to great faith in my judgment?" "Oh, yes, as a matter of judgment. Only—" "Very well, then. Be lonesome, if you must be lonesome. I hope you will be. It's part of the treatment. And then you'll come back and in your first burst of delight tell Karl just what you've done. When he says it's impossible, you'll just laugh. You'll get him to try and then the day is yours." Out on the street she stopped half a dozen times in the first block, thinking she would go back and tell Dr. Parkman she couldn't possibly leave Karl. "Why, he's a terrible man," she mused, half humorously, half tearfully, "sending wives away from husbands like this. Wanting people to be lonesome, just because he thinks it's good for them. I'll not do it. I'll go back and tell him. Won't!" But she did not go back. She felt Dr. Parkman might look unpleasant if a patient came back to say, "I won't." No one would ever get up courage enough for that, she concluded mournfully. "So I'll just have to go." End of Chapter 32.
Chapter 33 of The Glory of the Conquered by Susan Glaspell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Matt Farrar. Chapter 33. Love's Own Hour. It was Sunday, and Ernestine was going away next morning. She had told Karl the day before. It alarmed him at first, for he telephoned Dr. Parkman, asking him to come out. When the doctor arrived, he demanded the truth as to Ernestine. Had anything happened? Was she not well? He was so relieved at the doctor's assurance that Ernestine was perfectly well, and was going away because of her work, that he accepted the situation more easily than she had anticipated. "Perhaps it will do me good, Liebchen," he told her. "I fear I'm getting to be a selfish brute, taking everything for granted and not appreciating you half enough." But that afternoon it was Ernestine herself who was forced to fight hard for cheerfulness. She did not want to go away. She was curiously depressed about it, and resentful. More than once she was on the point of telephoning to Dr. Parkman that she could not leave Karl. Georgia and Joe and Mrs. McCormick came in about 5, and Georgia's spirit seemed to blow through the house like a strong, full current of bracing air. She and Joe had returned from California the night before, and there were many things to tell about their trip. Mrs. McCormick said it was indeed curious how some people always had so many more adventures than other people had. She wondered why it was she never met any of those amusing persons Georgia was always telling about. Their visit did Ernestine much good. It was impossible to feel blue or have silly forebodings in the presence of so much naturalness and cheer as always emanated from Georgia. Those hearty laughs
had cleared the atmosphere for her. "Look here, Liebchen," said Karl, emerging from a brown study. "We must fix up a code." "A code, dear?" "For your writing to me. You see, Ross will have to read the letters, and how can you say in every other line you love me, with that duffer reading it out loud?" "Oh, Karl, how stupid of me not to learn writing the other way! You see, it never occurred to me I would be away from you. Couldn't I take that manual and make it out from that?" "Well, you might, but we'll do both. It will be fun to have a code. Now, when you say, 'I am a trifle tired,' you mean, 'Oh, sweetheart, I am so lonesome for you that I am never going away again.'" "But won't Mr. Ross think it strange if I say in each letter that I am a trifle tired?" "What do we care what he thinks? They're not his letters, are they? And when you say, 'New York seems most attractive,' you mean, 'Oh, dearest, I never dreamed I loved you so much. I am finding out in 1,000 new ways how much I care, and never, never shall we be separated again.' And when I say, 'I send you my love,' it will be perfectly proper for Mr. Ross to read that, I mean, 'Dear love, I send you 1,000 kisses, and I would give the world for 1 minute now in your arms.'" And so they arranged it, revising, enlarging, going over it a great many times to have it all certain. There was such a tender kind of fun in it. As to the other side of it, Karl, of course, could write to her on his typewriter. It was a beautiful evening they had sitting there before the fire. She saw pictures for him, and he even saw some pictures for her. He said a blind man could see certain pictures no one else could possibly see. They spoke of how they had never been separated since their marriage, of how strange it would seem to be apart, but always of how beautiful to be together again. There was such a sweetness, tenderness, in the sadness which hung about their parting. They made the most of their pain, as is the way of lovers, for it drew them together in a new way, and each kiss, each smallest caress, had a new and tender significance. "You'll be back in time for your birthday, Ernestine?" "Oh, yes, I'm only going to stay a week." "I thought you said perhaps 2." "Did I? Well, I've decided 1 will be enough." "Ernestine, what have you been painting? Tell me, dear. That's one thing I'm a little disappointed in. I do so want to keep close to your work." "Well, Karl?" after a silence. "That picture I have been working on this winter is hard to tell about because it is in a field all new to me. It is a picture which emphasizes, or tries to, what love means to the world. A picture which is the outgrowth of our love. I am not sure that it is good in all its technical features, but I believe there is atmosphere in it, poetic feeling, and, back of that, thought, and soul, and truth. I think there is harmony and richness of color. Some people will say it is very daring, and no one will call it conventional, but I am hoping—" Ernestine's voice was so low and full of feeling, he could scarcely get the words—"that it is going to be a very great picture, the greatest I have ever done. Some of it has been hard for me, dear. In truth, I have been much discouraged at times. But great things are not lightly achieved, Karl, and if this is anything at all, it is one of the great things. As to the subject detail, I am going to ask you to wait until I come back. I have been keeping it for you as a little surprise. Perhaps it will help some of your lonely hours, dear." Her voice quivered. "To think about the beautiful surprise. And if it seems strange sometimes that I could bring myself to go away from you, will you not bear in mind, Karl, dear, that I am doing it simply that the great surprise may be made perfect for you? It is a whim of mine to keep this a great secret. In the end I know you will forgive the secrecy. And when I come back," her voice was stronger, fuller now, "I am going to make you see it just as plainly as you ever saw anything in all your life." "You must. I couldn't bear it to be shut out from your work." "You are not going to be shut out from my work. She said it with an intensity almost stern. "I want your life to be happy, Ernestine," he said, after a time, and the words seemed to have a new meaning spoken out of this mood of very deep tenderness. "I don't want it to be darkened. I want my love to make you happy, in spite of it all." "It does," she breathed. "It does." "But I want you to be as you used to be. I haven't been fair in letting this make such a difference with us." "Karl, how can you talk like that, when you have been so splendid?" "But you see I don't want to be splendid," he said whimsically. "I'd rather be a brute than be splendid. And I want you to love me always as you did at first, just because you couldn't help yourself." "I cannot help myself now," she laughed. "I am just as helpless as I ever was." And then a long and very precious silence. She was filled with many things too deep for utterance, even had she been free to speak. She thought of her birthday night a year before, their happiness then, all that had come to them since, all that love had meant, the great things it was to do for them. She looked at Karl's face, his fine, strong face which seemed the very soul of the mellow firelight. How would that dear face look when she told him what she had done? Convinced him that great things were before them now? Would it not be that his determination not to fail her would stir fires which, even in his most triumphant days, had slumbered? But from exultation in all that she passed to the heart's pain in leaving him. She moved a little closer, took his hand and rested it lovingly against her cheek. She had never been away from Karl. Tears came at the thought of it now, and he must have been thinking of what Ernestine had meant to him in the last year. For of a sudden he stooped down and, with his old abandonment, with all the fullness of the first passion and the tender understanding of these later days, gathered her into his arms. "Oh, Ernestine," he whispered, breathing into her name all that was in his heart. "Ernestine." End of Chapter 33. Chapter 34 of The Glory of the Conquered by Susan Glaspell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Matt Berard. Chapter 34. Almost Dawn. She found that in the beginning, at least, it was as Dr. Parkman had said. It was good to sleep. It was good to go to bed at night with the sense of nothing to do in the morning, good to wake at the usual time, only to feel she might go back to that comfortable, beautiful sleep. For Ernestine was indeed very tired. Since that day when the great idea had come to her, there had been no time when she was free from the sense of all that lay before her. But now she could rest. Strangely enough, she did not worry greatly about Karl. Her first waking thoughts were of him, but fuller consciousness always brought the feeling that it was all right with Karl. He was missing her, of course, but she was going back to him very soon and bring him the things he had believed shut away forever, bring him the light. That was the way she had come to think of it. The deliciousness of her rest was in the sense of its being right she should take it. She could best serve Karl by resting until she was her strongest self. Her room was so quiet and restful, the bed so comfortable, and Mrs. Rolfe, Dr. Parkman's old nurse, so good to her. It was soothing to be told to close her pretty eyes and go to sleep, sustaining to be met with, "Now here is something for our little lady to eat." After many days of responsibility, it was good to be mothered a little. But after the first revel in sleep had passed, she did a great deal of languid, undisturbed thinking. She seemed detached from her life, and it passed before her, not poignantly, but merely as something to look upon, quietly muse about. Soon she would step back into it, but now she was resting from it, simply viewing it as an interesting thing, which kept passing before her. From the very first it came before her, from those days when she was a little girl at home, and she found much quiet entertainment in trying to connect herself of those days with herself of the now. Am I all one? She would want to know, and in thinking that over would quite likely fall asleep again. She thought a great deal about her father and mother. They were more real to her than they had been for a long time, but it was hard to connect the Ernestine of that home with the Ernestine who belonged to Karl. There was Georgia, to be sure, who extended clear through. Dear Georgia! How well she had looked Sunday in that beautiful black gown! She remembered such a funny thing, and such a dear thing, Georgia had done once. They had become chums as freshmen, and when they were sophomores Georgia came to their house to live, and one night she inadvertently said something which started one of those terrible arguments, and ended in the saying of so many bitter things that Ernestine could not bear it, especially before Georgia, and as soon as she could she left the table and went up to her room. She did not cry. Her mother cried so much that it seemed enough for the family, but she sat there very still, looking straight ahead, denying herself even the luxury of tears. And then, just when that atmosphere of unhappiness and bitterness seemed pressing down upon her, crushing her, there had come a wild shriek from Georgia. "Ernestine! Ernestine! Get your things quick! Let's go to the fire!" That was not to be resisted even by a 19-year-old girl. She remembered tumbling into her things, running 2 blocks, and then gasping, "Where is it?" And Georgia replied, gasping too, "Don't know. Small boys. Said so." And then, after running all over town, they found there was no fire at all, and that had so overcome them with laughter that she forgot all about those other things which would have given her so miserable an evening. She had had just a little suspicion then, and now she had a firm conviction that Georgia never heard small boys say anything about fire that night. Bless Georgia's big heart! She loved her for just such things as inventing fires for unhappy people to go to. As she lay there resting away from the current of her life, she thought a great deal about a little grave over in France, such a very, very small grave which represented a life which had really never come into the world at all. She could fancy her baby here with her now, patting her face, pulling her hair, so warm and dear and sweet. Her arms ached for that little child which had been hers only in anticipation. And what it would have meant to Karl! The laughter of a very small voice, the cuddling of a very small head. Deep thoughts came then, and deeper yearnings, and when Mrs. Rolfe came in at one of those times, she was startled at the look in the deep brown eyes of her patient, a look which seemed to be asking for something which no one could give, and when Ernestine smiled at her, as she always did, the woman could scarcely keep back the answering, "Never mind, dearie, never you mind." And through all of her thoughts there was Karl, his greatness, his work, his love. She would be so happy when she did not have to keep things back from Karl. It seemed it would be the happiest moment of her life when she could throw her soul wide open to him with, "There is never going to be another thing kept back from me." She could not bear the thought of Karl's believing she was in New York. But soon there would be no more of that, and Karl himself would tell her she had done it because she cared so much. And most beautiful of all things to think about was the hour when she would tell him. How would he look? What would he say? On the 5th morning she awakened feeling quite different. Those birds! What were they singing about? She got up and raised the curtain, and then drew in a long breath of delight, for it was a radiant spring morning, breathing gladness and joy and all beautiful things. Oh, how beautiful off there in the trees which were just coming back after their long sleep. She, too, had been asleep, but it was time now to wake up and be glad. She felt very much awake and alive this morning. Oh, how those birds were singing! She laughed in sheer happiness and began to sing too. She would dress and go out of doors. To remain in her room 1 hour longer would be unbearable bondage. For all the world was awake and glad. She could scarcely wait to get out there among the birds and trees. She had never felt so alive, so well tuned to life, so passionately eager for its every manifestation as when, after a hurried breakfast, she started up the beautiful green hill to the trees where all the birds were singing, the soft breath of the spring enfolding her, her spirit lifting itself up to meet the caress of the spirit of spring. She walked with long, swinging step, smiling to herself, humming a glad little air, now and then tossing her head just to get the breath of spring upon her face. In some new way Mrs. Rolfe watched her from the kitchen door, smiling. On the hilltop she stopped, standing straight, breathing deep, reveling in the song of the birds. They were fairly intoxicated with joy at this morning, listening to the soft murmur of the spring beneath it all. Happy, oh, so happy, as she looked off to the far distances. The long winter had gone, and now the spring had come again, the dear spring she had always loved. It was with her, too, almost an intoxication, the throwing off of gloom, the taking on of joy. On such a morning nature calls unto her chosen, and they hear her call, and are glad. As she stood there on her hilltop, her spirit lifted itself up in lyric utterance, her whole being responded to the songs of the returning birds. How well Dr. Parkman had planned it! She would go back now and tell Karl what a great thing it was to be alive, how the spirit was everything and could conquer all else. It seemed very easy now. It was all a matter of getting the spirit right. How good of Dr. Parkman to think it out like this. But there was something a little wrong. She stopped for a minute, pondering. Now she knew. Karl! Why could he not be here too? All in an instant she saw it so clearly that she laughed aloud. She was rested now, ready to tell him. And this the place. She would send for him. Mr. Ross, or perhaps the doctor himself, would come with him, and here where it was all so beautiful, where the call of the spring reached them and made them glad, she would tell him. And then, her spirit strong as hers was now strong, he would respond to it, be made ready for the fight. How simple and how splendid! How stupid not to have thought of this before! And then again she laughed. It would be fun to improve on Dr. Parkman's idea. That was all very well, but this 1,000 times better. Karl's spirit, too, needed lifting up. What could do it as this? It was true he could not see it with his eyes, but there were so many other ways of being part of it. The singing of the birds, the scent of the budding trees, the rich breath of spring upon one's face. And even the vision should not be lost to him. She would make him see it. She would make him see the sunlight upon the trees, the roll of that farther hillside. One did not need to try to forget the park commissioners here. And then she would say to him, "See, Karl, even as I can make you see the trees and that little brook there in the hollow, just as plainly as I can make you see the sky and the hill come together off there, so plainly will I make you see the things in the laboratory which belong with your work." She would prove to him, by the picture she drew of these green fields in springtime, that she could make plain to him all he must see. How glorious to prove it to him by the springtime! And then, both of them uplifted, gladdened, both of them believing it could be done, loving each other more than they had ever done before, newly assured of the power of love, they would go back and with firm faith and deep joy begin the work which lay before them. She turned to walk back to the house. She would send a telegram to Dr. Parkman that Karl must come. Perhaps he could be here to night. To morrow, surely. Dear Karl, who needed a vacation more than he? Who needed the rejuvenation of the spring as Karl needed it? She had walked but a little way when she stopped. Someone was coming toward her, walking fast. Had the sun grown a little dim, or was something passing before her eyes? The world seemed to darken. She looked again at Mrs. Rolfe, coming toward her. How strange that she shivered! Was it a little chilly up here on the hilltop, where a minute before it had been so soft and warm? She wanted to go to meet Mrs. Rolfe, but she did not. She stood strangely still, waiting. And why was it that the figure of Mrs. Rolfe was such a blur on the beauty of the hillside? But when at last she saw her face, she did run to meet her. "What is the matter?" Her voice was quick and sharp. The woman hesitated. "Tell me," demanded Ernestine. "I will not be treated like that." "Dr. Parkman wants you to come home," the woman said, not looking Ernestine in the face. "Why? Karl?" She caught roughly at the other woman's arm. She knew then that she could not temporize nor modify. "Dr. Hubers was taken sick yesterday. He was to have an operation. The telegram should have been delivered last night." She thought Ernestine was going to fall. She swayed so, her face went so colorless, her hands so cold. But she did not fall. "That is all you know?" It came in hoarse, broken whisper. And when the woman answered yes, Ernestine started, running for the house. End of chapter 34. Chapter 35 of The Glory of the Conquered by Susan Glaspell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Matt Berard. Chapter 35. Oh, hurry, hurry! That train! She would go mad if it kept stopping like that. She kept leaning forward in her seat, every muscle tense, fairly pushing the train on with every nerve that was in her. Never once did she relax. On, on, it must go on. She would make it go faster. When it stopped, she clenched her hands, her nails digging into the flesh. And then when it started again, that same feeling that she, from within herself, must push it on. At times she looked from the window. Now this field was past, they were so much nearer. Soon they would be over there where the track curved. That was a long way ahead. They were going faster now. She would lean forward again, pushing on, trying through the straining of her own nerves to make the train go faster. Mrs. Rolfe had wanted to come with her, but she said no. It seemed she could get there faster by herself. There had been an hour's wait for the train. It made her sick, even now, to think back to that hour. At least this was doing something, getting somewhere. She had telegraphed to everyone she could think of, but no reply had come up to the time the train started. She reasoned that out with herself, now for good, now for bad. And then, if he were better, if there were anything good to tell. Her temples were thumping more loudly than the train thumped. Her heart was choking her. Her throat was so tight she could not breathe. Again and again she went over it to herself. Dr. Parkman had operated on Karl. Of course Dr. Parkman would do it right. He would not dare to operate on him without her being there unless he was absolutely sure it would be all right. And then, close upon that, he would have waited for her, if appendicitis. That was what those quick operations were, and most of them, especially with Dr. Parkman, came out all right. And Karl was the doctor's best friend. Would not a man save his best friend when he could save everyone else? And Karl himself, his will, his power, his love for her, why, Karl would know that nothing must happen while she was away. But close upon that came awful visions. Oh, why had Dr. Parkman sent her away, and then done this thing? She would tell him when she got there. She would tell him. It would be all right when she got there. If only the train would hurry! There was smoke off there, wasn't it? It was the smoke of Chicago! Nothing had ever looked so beautiful before. Very soon now. Why, perhaps within a few hours she and Karl would be laughing at this. "Isn't it great the way I got on, liebchen?" he would say. "Isn't Parkman a dandy?" They were passing those houses on the outskirts. Oh, why was Chicago so big? But she must be calm, very calm. She must not excite Karl in the least. How sorry he would be that she had been frightened like this. They were passing larger buildings, coming closer to the city. She gritted her teeth hard, clenched her hands. Karl was at the hospital. The telegram told that. She would get off at the stop just this side of the main station. That was a little nearer the hospital, she believed. She would take a cab. If only there was an automobile. But the cabman would surely go very fast if she told him why she had to hurry like this. Long before the train came to its stop she was standing at the door. She would not have waited for the standstill if the porter had not held her back. Oh, how she must hurry now! She ran to the nearest cabman. Would he hurry very fast? Faster than he had ever had before? It was life and death. It was "Yes, yes, lady," he said, putting her in. "Yes, I understand. I'll hurry." "But faster," she kept saying to him. "Oh, please, faster." She saw nothing either to the right or left. She saw only the straight line ahead, which they must travel. And still everything from within her was pushing her on. Oh, if the man would only hurry! A big building at last, the hospital. Only 2 blocks now, then 1, and then the man had slowed up. She was out before he stopped, running up the steps. Somebody in the hospital would pay, and up the stairs. The elevator was there, but her own feet would take her faster. "Dr. Hubers? Where is he?" she said in choked voice to a nurse in the hall. The nurse started to speak, but Ernestine, looking ahead, saw Dr. Parkman standing in the door of a room. She rushed to him with outstretched hand, white, questioning, pleading face. Her lips refused to move.
End of chapter 35.
Chapter 36 of The Glory of the Conquered by Susan Glaspell. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Matt Berard. Chapter 36 With the Outgoing Tide. He simply took her into the room, and there was Karl, alive! That was all she grasped at first. It filled her so completely she could take in nothing else. He was lying there, seemingly half asleep, looking much as he always did, save that of course it was plain he was very sick. She stooped down and kissed him, and his face lighted up, and he smiled a little. "Ernestine," he murmured, "did they frighten you?" It was as she had known. His thought was of her. And oh, how sorry Karl would be when he was quite well and she told him all. She nestled her head close to him, her arm thrown about him. The tears were running down her cheeks. Of the blessedness of finding Karl here, breathing, smiling upon her, sorry she had been frightened. She took his hand and it responded to her clasp. That thrilled her through and through. Those awful fears, those never to be forgotten fears, that Karl's hand might never close over hers again. She leaned over him that she might feel his breath upon her face. In all her life there had never been so blessed a joy as this feeling. Karl's breath upon her cheek. Nothing mattered now. Work, eyes, nothing. She had him back. She asked nothing more of life. What could anything else matter now that those awful fears had drawn away? She was sobbing quietly to herself. Again his hand closed over hers. Then something made her look up, and at the foot of the bed she saw Dr. Parkman. One look at his face and she grew cold from head to foot. Her throat grew painfully tight. Strange things came before her eyes. She could not move. She simply remained there upon her knees, looking at Dr. Parkman's face, her own frozen with terror. The doctor came to her, took her hands, and helped her to rise. Two nurses and another doctor were bending over Karl, doing something. Dr. Parkman led Ernestine into an adjoining room. She did not take her eyes from his face. The appeal, terror in them, seemed to strike him dumb. It was as though his own throat were closed. For several times he tried vainly to speak. "Ernestine," he said at last, "Karl is very sick." "How sick?" she managed to whisper. "How sick?" she repeated, as he stood there looking at her helplessly. And finally he said, as if it were killing him to do it, "So sick that—" "Don't say that!" she fairly hissed it at him. "Don't dare say that! You did it, you—" And then sinking down beside him, catching hold of his hand, she sobbed out, wildly, heartbreakingly, "Oh, Dr. Parkman! Oh, please, please tell me you will save Karl!" Her sobs were becoming uncontrollable. "Ernestine," he said sharply, "be quiet! Be quiet! You have got to help!" The sobs stopped. She rose to her feet. He pulled up a chair for her, but she did not sit down. A few sobs still came, but her face was becoming stern, set. "Tell me," she said, holding her two hands tight against her breast, and looking him straight in the face. And then he jerked it out. Karl had been taken ill. Pain, fever, he feared appendicitis. He had two other doctors see him. They agreed that he must be operated on immediately. They brought him here. They found conditions awful. They did all that surgery could do. Every known thing was being done now. But they did not know. He had rallied a little from the operation. Now he seemed to be drooping. He was in bad shape generally. Heart weakened by the shock of his blindness. Intestines broken down by lack of exercise. Whole system affected by changed conditions. All these things combined against him. He told the short story with his own lips white, swaying a little, seeming fairly to age as he stood there. Her face had been changing as she listened. He had never seen a human face look as hers did then. He had never heard a human voice sound as hers sounded when she said, "Dr. Parkman, you are mistaken." She looked him straight in the eye, a look which held the whole force of her being. "I say you are mistaken. We will go back in here now to Karl. You and I together are going to save him." There was the light from the higher worlds in her eye as she went back, in her voice a force which men have never named or understood, and something which emanated from her took hold of every one who came into that room. There was more than the resources of medical science at work now. On her knees beside the bed, her arm about him, passionately shielding him from the dark forces around him, her face often touching his as if reassuring him, Ernestine spoke to Karl, quietly, tenderly, forcefully, love's own intuition telling her how much to say, when to speak. By her warm body which loved him, by her great spirit which claimed him, she would hold him from the outgoing tide. Her voice could rouse him where other stimulants failed. The only effort he made was the tightening of his hand over hers, and sometimes he smiled a little as he felt her close to him. 2 hours went by. The lines in Dr. Parkman's face were deepening. They worked on unfalteringly. Hypodermics, heat, rubbing, oxygen, all those things with which man seeks to deceive himself, and for which the foe, with the tolerance of power, is willing to wait. But their faces were changing. The call of the outgoing tide, that tide over which human determination has not learned to prevail, was coming close. They worked on where they were trained to work on, even through the sense of their own futility. Looking about her, Ernestine saw it all, and held him with a passionate protectiveness. If all else failed, her arms, arms to which he had ever come for help, and consolation, could surely hold him. The cold fear crept farther and farther into her heart, and as it crept on her arms about him tightened. Not while she held him like this! Oh, not while she held him like this! And then a frenzy possessed her, that she should sit here powerless, weeping, despairing, surrendering, while Karl slipped from her. She must do something, say something, something to hold him firm, call him back, make him understand that he must fight. Suddenly a light broke over her face. She looked at Dr. Parkman, who was bending over Karl. "I will tell him," she whispered, "what I did. The secret about the work." He hesitated. Medically his judgment was against it, and then, white to the lips with a horror of the admission, he faced the fact that this had passed beyond things medical. Let her try where he had failed. Through a rush of uncontrollable tears he nodded yes. And she did tell him, in words which were not sentences, with sharp flashes of thought, such flashes as alone could penetrate the semi-consciousness into which she must reach, after a moment of pause in which to gather herself together for the great battle of her life, with concentration, illumination, with a piercing eloquence which brought hot tears to every cheek, and deep, deep prayers to hearts which would have said they did not know how to pray. A woman fighting for the man she loved, human love at its whitest heat pitted against destiny. She told him. "Karl, at the last, you understand? That's the great secret. That's the great picture I've not painted one stroke this winter. I've been working for you, working in your laboratory every day, studying day and night, getting ready to be your eyes, going to give you back your work. Oh, Karl, Karl, won't you?" But the sobs could hold back no longer. She had reached him. He took it in, just a little at first, but comprehension was growing, and upon his face a great wondering, a softening. "Old man," it was Dr. Parkman now, "you get that? See what you've got ahead? Good God, man, but it was splendid! She came to me with the idea, her idea. Thought it all out herself. Karl was not happy. Karl must have his work. Karl, Karl! It was nothing but Karl. She was closer to him than anyone in the world. She could make him see what others could not. Then she would be his eyes. Man, do you know that this woman has fairly made over her soul for love of you? Do you know that she has given up becoming one of the great painters of the world to become your assistant? Do you get it, Karl? So help me God, it was the pluckiest fight I've ever seen or heard of. And she's won. I'm no fool, and I say she can do what she says she can. She's ready. She's ready to begin tomorrow. What do you say, old man? What do you think of Ernestine now? Isn't she worth taking a good brace and living for?" And then he got it all. He was taking it in, rising to it, understanding, glowing. And a look that was very wonderful was growing upon Karl's face. "Ernestine," he whispered, dwelling long upon the name. His voice, a voice of wonder. "You did that for me?" "I did it because I love you so," she whispered, and it seemed that surely death itself could not withstand the tenderness of it. And then his whole face became transfigured. His blind eyes were opened to the light of love. His illumined face reflected it as the supreme moment of his life. In that moment he triumphed over all powers set against him. He rose out of suffering on wings of glory. He transcended sorrow and tragedy, blindness. Yes, in that moment, death. He saw behind the veil. He saw into the glory of a soul. He comprehended the wonder of love, compensation for suffering and loss, understanding, victory, peace. It was the human face lighted with divine light. They did not dare to move or breathe as they looked down upon the wonder of his face. "Ernestine, little one," he whispered, the light not going from his face. "You love me? Like that? You see, Karl?" It was this must reach him. "What you have to live for now?" But he did not get that. He was filled with the wonder of that which he was seeing. "You see, old man," said Parkman, sharply, "what you've got ahead of you?" But he only murmured, happily, faintly, as one about to fall asleep, "She loved me like that." It terrified her, it seemed, not as though the great idea were holding him, but as though he were taking it away with him, even as though well content to go, having this to take with him from life. "Karl, Karl," she sobbed, "don't you see how I love you? Don't you see you must live now for me?" But he had far transcended all senses of suffering or loss, even her suffering and loss. Her plea, she herself, could not reach him. He and the great idea were going away together, and that light did not leave his face. It was so that he sank into a sleep. He did not hear Ernestine's sobs. He knew nothing of her pleading cries. In a frenzy of grief she felt him going out to where she could not reach him. She called to him, and he did not answer. She pressed close to him, and he did not know that she was there. But the great idea was with him. It lighted his face to the last. It was as if that were what he was taking with him from life. It was as if that, and that alone, he could keep. "Karl, Karl!" she cried, terrorized. "Look at me! Speak to me! I am here! Ernestine is here!" And then the strongest word of woman to man: "I'm frightened! Oh, take care of me, Karl! Take care of me!" Dr. Parkman tried to take her away, but she resisted fiercely, and they let her stay. And during the few hours which followed she never ceased her pleading. To him, to come back to her. To them, to help. Crazed with the consciousness of his slipping from her, wild beyond all reason with the thought that her kisses could not move him, her arms could not hold him, her passion lashed to the uttermost in the thought that she must claim him now or lose him forever, she pleaded with all the eloquence of human voice and human tears. She could not believe it, that he was there beside her and would not listen to her pleadings. Again and again she told him that she was frightened and alone, that, surely that, he must hear. It could not be that he was there beside her, breathing, moving a little now and then, and did not hear her call for help. And when at last she heard someone speak a low word, and saw someone bend over him to close his eyes, she uttered one piercing, heartbreaking cry, which they would bear with them so long as they lived. And then, throwing herself upon him, shielding him, keeping him, there came the wild, futile call of life to death. "Karl, Karl, Karl!" End of chapter 36. End of part 2.
Chapter 37 of The Glory of the Conquered. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kathleen. The Glory of the Conquered by Susan Glaspell. Beneath Dead Leaves. The cold March rain drove steadily against the car window. His thoughts were like that, cold, ugly, driving thoughts. Looking out at the bleak country through which they were passing, he saw that dead leaves were hanging forlornly to bare trees. His hopes were like that, a few dead hopes clinging dismally to the barren tree of experience. So it seemed to Dr. Parkman as he looked from the car window at the country of hills and hollows through which he was passing. The outlived winter snow still in the hollows, last summer's leaves blown meaninglessly about, denied even the repose of burial. The cheerless wind and the cheerless rain, it matched his mood. Almost a year had gone by, and Dr. Parkman was going out to see Ernestine. Every mile which brought him nearer brought added uncertainty as to what he should say when he reached her. What was there for him to say? The dead leaves of her hopes were all huddled in the hollow. Was he becoming so irrational as to think he could give life to things dead? Was she not right in wishing to cover them up decently and let them be? Was anything to be gained in blowing them about as last summer's leaves were being blown about now by the unsparing, uncaring winds of March? She was out where she had lived as a girl, living in the very house which had once been her home. He had understood her going. It was the simple law of living things. The animal wounded beyond all thought of life seeks only a place of seclusion. But when Georgia returned from her visit to Ernestine the month before, she came to him with, "Dr. Parkman, you must do something for Ernestine." And after she had told him many things, and he questioned still further, she said, in desperate desire to make it plain, "She is becoming a great deal like you." And from then until the time of starting on this trip he had no peace. He understood far more deeply than she who would have him see. Was anyone better qualified to understand that thing than he? Well, what then? What now? Was there any one thing to expect? Was he, of all men, going to her with platitudes about courage and faith? And even so, would sophistry avail anything? Did he not know Ernestine far too well for that? His own face bore the deep marks of hard and bitter things, but the loss and the sorrow showed themselves in strange ways, little understood as manifestations of grief. He ran his automobile faster, showed even less caution than before in his business ventures, had less and less to say, was called more and more strange by those associated with him, and the thing which mocked him most of all was that the year had been attended with the greatest professional successes of his life. He never heard his plaudits sounded without a curse in his heart. It went mighty hard with Parkman not to be able to save Hubers, medical men said with growing frequency as the year advanced. But there were none of them who dreamed into what deep and vital things the cut had gone. With his own will and his own skill, he patched it up on the surface. Not the man to leave his wound exposed to other eyes, but he knew its hopelessness too well ever to try and reach the bottom of the wound. It was not a good, clean, straight cut such as time expects to heal. Indeed, it was not a cut at all, nothing so wholesome and reachable as that. It was a destroying force, a thing burrowing at the springs of life, a thing which made its way through devious paths to vital sources. Did a patched-up surface mean anything to a thing like that? The evening of the day he had seen Georgia, and she told him of Ernestine. He sat a long time in his office alone. The grey ashes of his own life seemed spread around him. And it was he who was asked out of this to rekindle a great flame. And what flame? What was there left for Ernestine? Ask her to come back? To what? Fight? For what? He did not know, or at least he said he did not know. And yet he, like Georgia, saw it as all wrong, unendurable, not to be countenanced, that Ernestine should shut herself out from life. Perhaps he was going to her because he knew so well the desolation of ashes. Was it because he had lived so long among them that he hated to see another fire go out? Could it be that a man who had dwelt long among ashes knew most surely the worth of the flame? He had reached the end of his journey. He had come to the western college town, for which he had set out. From the window he could see some of the college buildings. Yes, this was the place. He rose and put on his coat. A few minutes later he was standing on the station platform, watching the ongoing train. Then he turned, with decision, in the direction Georgia had bade him go. End of Beneath Dead Leaves. Section 38 of The Glory of the Conquered. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kathleen. The Glory of the Conquered by Susan Glaspell. Patchwork Quilts. And now that the first 10 minutes had passed, he felt anew the futility of his errand. His first look into her face made him certain he might better have remained in Chicago. The thing which cut off all approach was that she too had done some work on the surface. It seemed to him as he sat there in utter silence that he had been brutal, not alone to her heart, but to his own, that he asked too much, not only of her command, but of his. He had come to talk of Ernestine and the future. The things about him drew him overmasteringly to Karl and the past. She had taken him to her little sitting room upstairs, forced to do so because the fire downstairs had gone out. He understood now why it was she had faltered so in asking him to come up here. Here was Karl's big chair, many things from their library at home. It was where she lived with her past. She wanted no one here. She would make no attempt at helping him. She sat there in silence, her face white, almost stern. In her aloofness it was as though she were trying to hold herself from the consciousness of his presence. He too remained silent, for he was filled with the very things against which he had come to protest. It was Karl who was very close. It was the thoughts of Karl's life which filled him. His heart had never been so warm for his friend. His appreciation had never been so great as now. Karl, and all that Karl meant, had never been so close and so dear. And the words he finally said to Ernestine, words of passionate tenderness, spoken in utter unconsciousness of how far he had gone from his purpose, were, "I do not believe any of us half appreciated Karl." Startled, she gave him a long, strange look. "No, Dr. Parkman," very low, "neither do I. I have been looking into it since. I wanted to throw Karl's results to the right man. He was head and shoulders above them all." There was a slow closing of her eyes, but she was not shrinking from him now. This the kind of hurt she was able to bear. If he had been left to work out his life, but he stopped, brought suddenly to a sense of how far he had lost himself. She too saw it. Dr. Parkman, with a smile which put him far from her. "This is what you came to say? You think I need any incitement? You needn't, Dr. Parkman," with rising passion. "You needn't. Every time I leave this room two things are different. I have more love for Karl, more hate for his destroyers. And those two passions will feed upon me to the end of my life." Instinctively he put out a protesting hand. It was too plain that it was as she said. More love for Karl, more hate for his destroyers. She repeated it with a passionate steadfastness as though it comprehended the creed of her life. "His destroyers?" he faltered. "What do you mean by that?" And she answered, with a directness before which dissembling and evasion crumbled away. "Read the answer in your own heart. And if you cannot look into your own heart," she went on, unsparingly, "if your own heart has been shut away so long that it is closed even to yourself, then look into your looking-glass and read the answer there. Let the gray hairs in your own head, the lines in your own face, yes, the words of your own mouth, tell you what you would know of Karl's destroyers." He drew his lips in that way of his. One side of his face twitched uncontrollably. He had come to reach her soul, reach it if must be through channels of suffering. He had not thought of her reaching his like this. But she could not stop. "And if you want to know what I have gone through, look back to what you have gone through yourself. Then make some of those hours just as much stronger as love is stronger than friendship. And perhaps you can get some idea of what it has been to me." He was dumb before that. Putting it that way, there was not a word to say. He saw now the real change. It was more than hollowed cheeks and eyes from which the light of other days had gone, more than soft curves surrendered to grief and youth eaten out by bitterness. It was a change at the root of things. A great tide had been turned the other way. But in the days when happiness softened her and love made it all harmonious, he had never felt her force as he felt it now. Reach this, turn this. The moment brought new understanding of the paltriness of words. It was she who spoke, Dr. Parkman, looking at him with a keenness in which there was almost an affectionate understanding. "You did not say what you intended to say when you came into this room." You intended to speak of me, but the room swept you back to Karl. Oh, I know, and it is just because you were swept back, care like this, that I am going to tell you something. Doctor, blinded with tears, we never understood. None of us ever knew what it meant to Karl to be blind. After he had gone, I found something. In this book, reaching over to Karl's copy of Faust, I found a letter, a very long letter Karl wrote in those last few days, when he was there, alone. I found it the day I went out to the library alone, the day before they broke it up. Oh, doctor, what it told! I want you to know. But she could not go on. When she raised her head, the fierce light of hate was burning through the tears. Can you fancy how I hate the light? Can you fancy with what feelings I wake in the morning and see it come? Light from which Karl was shut out, which he craved like that, and could not have? Do you see how it symbolizes all those other things taken from him and me? He talked of another light he must gain for himself, light which the soul must have. And Karl was longing for the very light I was ready to bring. He would have believed in it, turned to it eagerly. The letter shows that. Do you wonder that there is nothing but darkness in my soul, that I want nothing else? Look at Karl's life, always cut off just this side of achievement. Every battle stopped right in the hour of victory, made great only to have his greatness buffeted about like, held up for sport. I will say it, in fierce response to his protesting gesture. It's true. He tried to speak, but this was far too big for words which did not come straight from the soul. Do you want to know what I am doing now? She laughed, and none of it had told as much as that laugh revealed. I am making patchwork quilts. Can you fancy anything more worthless in this world than a patchwork quilt? Cutting things up and then sewing them together again, and making them uglier in the end than they were in the beginning? Do you know anything more futile to do with life than that? Well, that's where my life is now. My aunt had begun some, and I am finishing them up. And once, but the sob in her voice gathered up the words. He wanted to speak then. That sob brought her nearer, but she went on. I sit sewing those little pieces together. A foolish thing to do, but one must be doing something. And as I think how useless it is, there comes the thought of whether it is any more useless than all the other things in life. Is it any more useless than surgery? For can a great surgeon save his best friend? Is it any more useless than science? For can science do anything for her own? Is it any more useless than ambition and purpose and hope? For does not fate make sport of them all? Is it any more useless than books? For can books reach the hearts which need them most? Is it any more useless than art? For does art reach realities? Is it any more useless than light? For can light penetrate the real darkness? Is it? She wavered, quivered. She had been talking in low, quick voice, her eyes fixed on something straight ahead, as though reading her words out there before her. And now, as she held back, and he saw what she saw and could not say, he asked for her, slowly, is it any more useless than love? End of Patchwork Quilts. Chapter 39 of the Glory of the Conquered. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kathleen. The Glory of the Conquered by Susan Glaspell. Ash heap and rose jar. As she broke then to the sobs for which he had hoped, something of tremendous force stirred within the man, and he felt that he could bring her from the outer darkness, where she had been carried, back to the things which were her soul's own, that his own life, his whole life, with all of the dark things through which it had passed, would have found justification. He had tried to save Karl, and failed, but there was left Ernestine, and it seemed to him, he saw it simply, directly, unquestioningly, that after all he would not have failed Karl if he could do what it was in his heart to do now for her. Looking at her bowed head he saw it all, the complete overthrow, the rich field of life rendered barren waste. Barren waste, but was that true for Ernestine? Did there not remain for her the scent of the field, the memory of that glorious, luxuriant growth? With him, barren waste. But for her did there not grow in the field of life some things which were everlasting? With the quickness with which he saw everything, he saw that it was the picture of his own barrenness, could show her most surely the things which for her remained. He drew back from the thought as one draws away from the rude touch upon a wound, lay bare the scars of his life, that another profit by their ugliness. Years of habit were against it. Everything fundamentally himself was against it. But he was a man who had never yet shrunk from the thing he saw was right to do. The cost of an accomplishment never deterred him from a thing he saw must be accomplished. With each second of listening to her sobs, he was becoming once more the man who masters, the man ruthless and unsparing in his purposefulness. "Ernestine," he began, and his voice was very strange, for it knew it was to carry things it had never carried before. "You and I are similarly placed, in that we have both lost the great thing of life, but there is something remains to each of us. Life has left something to us both. To you it has left a rose jar, to me a heap of ashes. It came with the moment's need. It comprehended it so well the channels long closed seemed of themselves to open, in the clearness with which he saw it, the fullness with which he felt it, he lost himself. Do you know that you have no right to cry out against life? Do you know that there are men and women who would lay down their lives, yes, and give up their immortal souls, for hours which you have had? Do you know that you have no right to say Karl Hubers was mocked by fate, made sport of, buffeted about? Do you know," his face went white as he said this slowly, "that I would be 1,000 times willing to give up my 2 eyes, yes, and lay down my life, just to know, as he knew, that love was great and life was good?" The tears remained undried upon her cheek. He held her. "Look deeper. There is another way to read Karl's life, a deeper truth than those truths you have been seeing. Ernestine, we all dream of love. We all desire it. It is only at rare times it comes, as it came to you. And I say to you, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart, that if you had been forced to give up your love in the first hour of its fulfillment, for all that you should thank God through the remainder of your life that it had been yours, for you had it, and nothing, loss, death, defeat, disappointment of every kind, can strip from your soul the consciousness that once, no matter for how short a time, love in its fullness and perfection was yours. Long, lonely years may come, and all hard things may come, but through it all, the thing to keep your soul in tune is the memory of some one perfect hour. Stillness followed that, the stillness which was silence. She had not moved. You dreamed your dream, and in his voice now the beautiful things of appreciation and understanding. I know your dream. You dreamed of growing old together, of taking from life everything there was together, of achieving to the uttermost, of rejoicing in each other's victories, growing more and more close together. I know your dream, a beautiful dream, giving up some things as the changing years do their work, and taking on the other things, the more quiet, in fact finer things, that come with the years. Oh, yes. Don't think I do not know that dream. To walk together down the years, meet them fearlessly, gladly, in the thought that they but add to the fullness of your love. I know. And now that it is not to be as you thought, you say life has left nothing to you, that you hate it, will have none of it. Oh, Ernestine, if you could only know how rich you are! Then harshly, rudely, the change. The voice which had seemed to caress each word was now like a lash. Suppose you didn't have the luxury of giving yourself up to your own heart. Suppose that every day and night of your life you had to fight memory, knowing it held nothing for you but jeers and mockery and things too damnable for words. Suppose you had to fairly forbid yourself to think of the beautiful things of life. Suppose that what had been the most beautiful moments of your life were made by memory the most hideous. Suppose the memory of his kiss always brought with it the consciousness of his falseness, that his words of love never came back to you without the knowledge that he had been laughing at you in his heart all the time. Suppose you could never get away from the damning truth that what you gave from the depth of your heart was tossed aside with a laugh. Suppose you had given the great passion of your life, the best that was in you, to a liar and a hypocrite. Suppose you had been made a fool of. Easy game. Then, what of life? Your belief in love, thoughts of fate. Great God, woman, can't you see what you have got? After the throbbing moment which followed that, there came a great quiet. Slowly passion settled to sadness. He seemed to have forgotten her, to be speaking instead to his own heart. As he said, very low, his voice touched with the tenderness of unrelinquished dreams, to have had 1 hour, just one perfect hour, and then the memory of that untarnished forever, it would be enough. Her heart rushed passionately to its own defense. She wanted to tell him no. She wanted to tell him it was cruel to be permitted to live for a time in a beautiful country, only to be turned out into the dark. She wanted to tell him that to know love was to need it forever. But his head had fallen to his hand. He seemed entirely lost to her, and even now she knew his answer to what she would say. "But you had it," he would reply. The cruel thing would be to awaken and find no such country had ever existed. They would get no closer than that. And with new passionateness her heart went out to Karl. Karl would understand it as it was to her. He felt, too, that they could come no closer than this. They sat there in the gathering twilight with their separate thoughts, as souls sit together almost in the dark, seeing one another in shadow across dim spaces. The tearing open of his heart had left him weakened with pain. Perhaps that was why he was so very tired. And perhaps it was because he was so tired that this thought of growing old came back to him. It seemed to him now, leaning back in his chair and filled with the things of which he had spoken, that almost as great as a living presence with which to share the years would be that thing of growing old with a beautiful memory. It would be a supreme thing to have a hand in your own hand, a face against your face, a heart against your heart as you stepped on into the years. But if that could not be, and perfection is not given freely in this life, surely it would keep the note of cheer in one's voice, the kindly gleam in one's eye, to bring with one into old age the memory of a perfect love. It would be lonely then when one sat in the twilight and dreamed. But what another loneliness! If instead of holding oneself away from one's own heart, one can turn to it with, "She loved me like that. Her arms have been about my neck in true affection. Her whole being radiated love for me. She had no words to tell it, and could tell it only with her eyes and with the richness and the lavishness of her kisses. She would have given up the world for me. She inspired me to my best deeds. She comforted me in my times of discouragement, and rejoiced with me in my hours of cheer. She is not here now, and it is lonely, but she has left me, in spirit, the warmth of her presence, the consciousness that she loved me with a love in which there was no selfishness nor faltering. And the things she has left me I can carry through life and into eternity." And all of that was Ernestine's could she but see her way to take it. He knew that it was growing late. "I must go," he said. But still he sat there, knowing he had not finished what he had come to say. But need he say it? Would it avail anything? Must not all human souls work their own way through the darkness? And when the right word came, Must it not come from Karl himself, through some memory, some strange breath of the spirit? He knew, but she would have to see it for herself. That each one seeing it for one's self was what made life hard. Would there not surely come a day, somewhere in the upward scale, where souls could reach one another better than this? But he had stirred her. He knew that by the way she was looking at him now. Finally, she asked, tremblingly, a little resentfully, "Dr. Parkman, what is it you would have me do?" "Do something with your life," was his prompt reply. "Help make it right for Karl." She caught that up breathlessly. "Make it right for Karl? You say he was always cut off just this side of achievement. Then you achieved something which will at least show what he was able to inspire." That sunk so deep that her face went very white. "But you do not understand," she whispered passionately. "You mean that I should paint? And I tell you, I cannot. I tell you it is dead." "Not necessarily that you should paint. Not just now, if you cannot. But come back into touch with life. Do something to force yourself back into it. And then let life itself show you that the other things are not dead after all." "But I do not want to," came bitterly from her. "Sometimes," he said, with more of his usual manner, "we do things we do not want to, and through the doing of them we get to want to. Do something, whether you want to or not. Stop doing futile things and dwelling on the sense of their futility. Why, Ernestine, come up to the hospital and go to work as a nurse. Heaven knows I never expected to advise you to do that, but anything, painting pictures or scrubbing floors, that will bring you back to a sense of living, the obligations of life, show you that something is yours that life and death and hell can't take from you." And still he sat there thinking. In just a moment he must go away, leaving her alone with the years which awaited her. For just an instant it seemed as though all of the past and all of the future were in his keeping. What word leave with her? He knew by her passionate breathing that he had reached her, and now he was going away. Could he have done more, reached deeper? In this, too, had he failed? What word leave with her? His heart was so full of many things that his mind did not know what to choose. He remembered the day she had come to him, filled with the spirit to ride down an adverse fate, and win triumph from defeat. Her splendid spirit then. Would that spirit ever come again? Could it? Karl was very close in those final moments, and even more close than Karl was the spirit of love. Many precious things seemed in his keeping just then. "Ernestine," he said at the last, and his face was white and his voice trembled. "You have known. It came to you. You had it. It came to you as June to the roses, in season, right. I grant you it was short. I grant you it was hard to see it go. But you had it. Say that to yourself when you go to sleep at night. Say it to yourself when you wake in the morning, and some day you will come to see what it means just to know that you know, and then your understanding and your heart will go out to all who have never known. You will pity all who scoff and all who yearn, and you will say to yourself, the world needs to know more about love, more than knowledge or science or any other thing. The world needs more faith in love. Then some day you will see that you not only know, but have the power to make it plain, and you will not hold back any longer then. And there is to be the real victory and completion of Karl Huber's life. There the real triumph over fate, that triumph of the spirit of love. I see it now. I see it all now. And my goodbye word to you is just this. I do not believe you are going to withhold from Karl the immortality which should be his. End of Ash Heap and Rose Jar. Chapter 40 of The Glory of the Conquered. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kathleen. The Glory of the Conquered by Susan Glaspell. Let there be light. Hours had passed, and still she could not master the sobs. It seemed no one had ever been as cruel as Dr. Parkman had been to her that afternoon. Karl would understand. And in her passionate need of Karl's understanding, she turned at last to the letter of which she had spoken, the letter which always seemed a little like Karl's voice speaking from out the silence. Old and worn and blurred with the grief spent upon it, the letter bore upon itself the record of the year's desolation. It had lived through things never to be told, never to be comprehended. Lonesome days, Liebchen, he had written. It would seem almost like a rush of light to feel you standing in the doorway now. My letters, which I send you, will tell you I am well, getting along all right, that I love you. These are some other things. If I think they will hurt you, I will not let you see them. But I will feel better to get them said. And of course, the easiest way to say them is to say them to you. I can't write. I wish I could. There are things way back in my thoughts I should like to say, and say right. For I have done some thinking this year, Liebchen. While I sat here writing textbooks, there came a good many thoughts. Textbooks. Any fool can write them. Lectures on what other men have done. What do I care about them? I'll do it. For I have to. But I want somebody to know. I want you to know that. I know it doesn't amount to a hill of beans. Liebchen, you hear a lot of talk about the beauties of resignation. Don't you ever believe any of it. We don't get resigned to things that really count. But what we do get is courage to bear them. I'm not resigned and I don't want to be. But I will try to be game about it, and we can't be game while we are sore. I know that because the times I've been least game are the times I was most sore. Wonder if anybody can make any sense out of that. Life's queer. You can't get around that. Making us one thing and then making us be another. What are we to think of it, Liebchen? Seems as if we could get on better if we could just get a line on the scheme of things. Understand what it is all about and the why. Or isn't there any why? I like a why for things. It gives them their place. I don't like disorder and senselessness. And if there isn't any why then? See what I'm getting at? What are you going to do when your force pushes you on to a thing which is closed to you? Stop the force? Well, doesn't that stop yourself? Turn it somewhere else? Easy to say in working out a philosophy, not so easy to do. Where's the end of it? That's what I want to know. I'm one of those practical chaps who wants to see an end in sight. Ernestine, light's a great thing. Light's the great thing. I never knew that until I went blind. You have to stay a long time in the darkness to know just what it is light means. They call great men great lights. And then came the light, they say, regarding the solving of some great thing. He brought the light. That's what I wanted to do. They tell about science bringing the light. I know now what a tribute they pay when they say that. Light of understanding, light of truth, and mine, Liebchen, the light of love. And well do I know how that light can shine into the darkness. More light, Goethe said, when he was going out into the dark. A great thing to ask for. I know how he felt. And God said, let there be light. I don't wonder that story has lived a long time. My books are finished. Now what? More books? Lectures? Some kind of old woman's makeshift? Sit here and watch my red blood dry up? Sit here like a plant shriveling away in the darkness? Be looked after and fussed over and have things made as easy for me as possible? I don't know. I can't see. There, Liebchen, I've taken a brace. I took a long drink of courage, and I'm in better shape. Often when I get like that, I've been tempted to take a long drink of something else, but I never have. Whiskey's for men who feel good, men who haven't much to fight. Not for me, not any such finish as that. I'm making bad business of this letter. I wanted to tell things, tell what light was and what darkness was, but I can't do it. Many things have been circling around my thoughts, and I thought I might get hold of a few of them and pull them in, but I can't seem to do it. I never was much good at writing things out. It's hard to get words for things that aren't even full-born thoughts. My work was great, Liebchen, great. A constant piercing of the darkness with light, a letting in of more light, new light. I can understand now why I loved it, where the joy was, what it was I was doing. Is life like that? Don't we understand things until we are out of them? By Jove, is it true that we have to get out of them in order to understand them? And if that's true, is it the understanding that's the goal? Is it? Oh, I don't know. I'm sure I don't know. But look here, Liebchen. Is it true that while I had the light, I didn't have it at all? Didn't know what it meant? Did I have to lose it in order to get it? For isn't it having a thing to understand it, more than it's having it to really have it and not understand? See what I mean? Those are some of the things circling around on the outside. Sometimes I think so. Sometimes I think the light was shut out that the greater light might come. Sometimes I think we scientists haven't the right line on the world at all. Why, Ernestine, sometimes I think it's miles deeper than we ever dreamed. A hodgepodge, this letter. Like my life, starting out one thing and ending up another, or rather not ending up anything at all. A going to pieces in the midst of my philosophy. A not being sure of anything. A constant perhaps. I'm lonesome. I'm tired. I don't feel well. The old ladies would say I'm under the weather. Why, I can't even keep feeling right when you're away. I want you. I want you here now. I can't talk to you on this infernal machine. My hands are groping around just as senselessly as my thoughts. I tell you, Liebchen, blindness is bad business. It sounds well in a poem, but it's a bad thing to live with. It's bad to wake up in the night sometimes and think that it will be daylight soon, and then remember that it will never be daylight for you again. I wish you were here. I'm just in the mood for talking. Not talking, perhaps, but having you close to me and understanding. There's one thing that there's no perhaps about. That's you. There's no perhaps when it comes to our love. There's no perhaps. Now, that made me fall a-dreaming. I stopped writing and lighted my pipe and sat a long time thinking of you. It's our hour. I know that, because I heard the clock strike. Where are you? Why aren't you here? I want you. Believe me, I said that before. But if I said it 1,000 times, I couldn't make it strong enough. I don't know why I want you like this soul want. It isn't just your kisses, your sweetness, the dear things about you. I want you to be here to understand, for you would. You do. My light in the darkness, my Ernestine. I shall never let you go away again. The darkness is too dark without you. Evening now, for again I stopped. Too tired, too quiet, some way to feel like writing. I am going to bed. I wish you were here for your good night kiss. I wish you were here just to tell me that you understand all these things I have not been able to say. I wish you were here to tell me what in my heart I know, that you are going to bring me the light, that love will light the way. I wish you were here to tell me that what my eyes cannot tell you as they used to, you can read now just by the beating of my heart, just through the fullness of our silences. Oh, little one, your eyes, your dear eyes, your lovely hair, your smile, your arms about my neck, your whispered word in my ear, your soft cheek against mine, your laugh, your voice, your tenderness. I want it all tonight. And the Ernestine of the silences, the Ernestine who understands without knowing, helps without trying. Soon you will be back. That will be sunrise after long darkness. Good night. It's hard to leave you, so lonesome, wanting you so. Again, good night, dear girl for whom my arms are yearning. Bless you, sweetheart. God bless you. And does God himself know what you have been to me? She read the last of it, as always, with sobs uncontrollable. Dr. Parkman, everything was forgotten. It was Karl alone in the library, longing for her, needing her, and she not there. Oh, Karl, Karl. She sobbed across the black chasm of the year. If I could only have had that hour. End of Let There Be Light. Chapter 41 of The Glory of the Conquered. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kathleen. The Glory of the Conquered by Susan Glaspell. When the tide came in, But the days which came then were different. Dr. Parkman had stirred her to a discontent with despair. She had come west with Georgia and Joe. For 5 days they had been at this little town on the Oregon coast. Through the day and through the night she listened to the call of the sea. It stirred her strangely. At times it frightened her. She did not know why she should have wished to come. Perhaps it was because it seemed a reaching out to the unknown. After she had known she was to go, she would awaken in the night and hear the far-off roll of the Pacific, and would lie there very still as if listening for something from the farther unknown. Her whole being was stirred, drawn, unreasoningly expectant. There were moments when she seemed to just miss something to which she was very close. Today she had walked clear around the bend. The little town and pleasant beach were hidden from view, and there was only the lighthouse out among the rocks, and the sea coming in wild and mighty to that coast to which no mariner would attempt to draw near. It was the hour of the incoming tide, and as the sea beat against the rocks, it seemed as omnipotent and relentless as that sea of fate against which nothing erected by man could hope to prevail. There was no human being in sight. Man, and all to which man blinded one, were far away. She was alone with things as they were, alone with the forces which made the world and life. And as the tides of the sea brought close to her wave after wave, so the mind's tides were bringing close to her wave upon wave of understanding. Fate had washed them away just as this ocean would wash away the child's playhouse built upon the sands. They had believed they could make their lives, that it was for their spirit to elect what they should do. Their hands build as they had willed, and all that the spirit had willed to do, and all that the hands set about to achieve, was washed away by just one of those waves of fate which rolled in and took them with no more of regret, no more of compassion, than the sea would have in washing away the playhouse built upon the sands. And if the sea were chidden for having taken away the house upon the sands, which meant much to someone, it would quite likely answer grimly, "I did not know that it was there." She laughed, and Karl would have hated life for bringing Ernestine to that laugh. But she laughed to think how she had looked fate in the face with the words, "I will prevail against you." Would the child, building its house upon the sand and saying to the ocean, "I will not let you take my house," be more absurd than she? What she had believed to be the tremendous force of her spirit had been as one grain of sand against the tides of ocean. What was one to think of it all then? Of human love, which believed itself created for eternity, of dreams which one soul persuaded one would come true, of aspirations born in a hallucination of power, of that spark within one which played one false, of believing one could master fate only to find one had erected a child's house upon the sands, and that what had been achieved in consciousness of great power could be swept away so easily that the ocean was not even conscious of having taken it onto itself. Very sternly, very understandingly, their lives swept before her anew. Just one little wave from the tide of fate had lapped up, unknowingly, uncaringly, that house upon the sand which a delusion of the spirit had made seemed a castle grounded in eternity. Why blind oneself to the truth and call life fair? For what had they fought and suffered and believed and hoped? Just to hear the mocking voice of the outgoing tide? The fury of the sea was creeping into her blood. Rage possessed her. All of her spirit, mightier than ever before, went out to meet the spirit of the sea, hating it, defying it, understanding its own futility, and the more hot from the sense of impotence. That died to desolation. She had never been so wholly desolate, the sea so mighty, she so powerless. Fate and human souls were like that. Karl, where was he? Swept out by the ocean of fate. To what shore had he been carried? What thought he had of the tide which had carried him out from her? Was his soul, like hers, spending itself in the passion of rebellion, so mighty as to shake the foundations of one's being, so futile as to prevail against not one drop of water in that sea of fate? Time passed, The tide was still coming in, nearing its height, but to the sea there had come a change. The spirit of it seemed different. For a long time she sat there dimly conscious of a difference, and then it seemed as though the sea were trying to reach her with something it had to bring. She tried to shake herself free from so strange a fancy, but it held her, and for a long time she sat there motionless, looking out at the sea with all her eyes, reaching out to it with all her soul, becoming more and more still. A hush upon her whole being, moved, held, unreasoningly expectant. The sea seemed to try to make her ready. Each wave which beat upon the rocks beat against her consciousness, driving against her mood and spirit, as if clearing a way, making her ready, open to what would come. It seemed finally to have cleared her whole being, driven away all which might impede. It seemed now as though she could take in things not seen or heard. There was that strange openness of the spirit, that hush, that unreasoning expectancy. All at once it rushed upon her, filling her overwhelmingly. It said that there was a sea mightier than what she called the sea of fate. It told of a sea of human souls over which fate only seemed to prevail. A great rush of truth filled her with this. It was the belief in the omnipotence of fate which was the real delusion of the spirit. Over and over again, with steadily rising tide, it told her that, no more to be reasoned away than the sea, resistless as the tide. She never knew in after years just what it was happened in that hour. She could not have told it, for it was not a thing for words to compass. But after that great truth had rushed full upon her, sweeping away the philosophy of her bitterness, Karl's spirit, something sent out from him to her, seemed to come in with the tide. It pleaded with her. He asked her to stop fighting and come back to the soul of things. He asked her to be Ernestine, his Ernestine. He told her that his own spirit could not find peace while hers was waging war and full of bitterness. He wanted her to make a place for them both in that great world harmony of their belief. He told her that out where souls see in wider sweeps, they know that there is a spirit over which death and fate cannot prevail. Darkness came on, but she had no thought of fear, and before she turned away something had risen from the dead. Out of woe and despair, defeat and bitterness, out of loneliness and a broken heart, something was born again. Karl asked that she make it right with the world. Karl asked for a child of their love, and at the last it was the call of the child to the mother which she heard. It was the maternal instinct of the spirit which answered. Very late that night, after she had sat long at her window, looking up at the stars, waiting, a great light seemed to appear, and shimmering against the sky, high above the tides of the sea, she saw the picture which she would paint. End of When the Tide Came In. Chapter 42 of The Glory of the Conquered. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kathleen. The Glory of the Conquered by Susan Glaspell. Work, The Saviour. For more than 3 years then, they saw nothing of Ernestine. She left this note for Georgia. I am sorry to seem erratic, but I cannot wait for you. I am going away at once. I am going first to New York, and then, I think, to Paris. I am going to do something which I can do better there than anywhere else. Thank you, Georgia, for everything. It must be satisfying to feel one has succeeded as beautifully in anything as you have succeeded in being a friend to me. Do not worry. There is nothing now to worry about. You will be glad to know that I am going back to my work. A little later, Dr. Parkman had this from her from New York. I am sailing for Paris. I am going to work. I see it all now, all that you would have me see, and more. Some day I will try to show you just how well I see it. I do not know how I am going to bear part of it, the going back where we were so happy, but I will bear it, for nothing shall keep me from the work I see before me. Thank you for all that you have done, and most of all for all that you have been. My idea is all comprehended in this. To the very uttermost of my power, I am going to make it right for Karl. 6 months later she wrote him this. Dear Doctor, Thank you for attending to those things for me. It infuriated me at first to think that the only thing in money left by the work of Karl's great life was the money from those books, which I resented so bitterly. But how wrong to see it that way, for Karl would be so happy to know that the brave work he did after his blindness was helping me now. But I never spend a dollar of this money without thinking of the mood, the circumstances, out of which it was earned. No money for the work he did for the blind. Karl intended that as a gift. He would be so glad to know of its usefulness. He thought it all wrong that books for the blind were so expensive, and so many of the great things not to be had. Karl used to repeat a little verse of Heine, which he translated like this: "At first I did not even hope, and to a hostile fate did vow, but I learned to bear the burden. Only do not ask me how. I have learned to bear it here in Paris. Only do not ask me how. I could not say, I do not know. But I want to tell you a few of the good things. You would not believe what that work in the laboratory has done for me. It has given me a new understanding of color, new sense of it, new power with eye and hand, a better sense of values. Would you have thought of that? And do you not see the reasons for my being glad? What I have done so far is but leading up to what I am going to do. That is so vital that it must not be done too quickly. I must get my hand in, gain what there is to be gained here, that the work I am going to do for Karl may have the benefit of it all. But I have made innumerable sketches, and it is growing all the time. There need be no fear of my losing it. I could no more lose it than I could lose my own soul. It grows as I grow. Sometimes I think I should wait 10 years, but I shall not. Yes, the critics like the picture of which you speak. Of course I am painting all the time, other things, various things, but it all seems like practice work to me, a mere getting ready. And then, after a long time, this is my birthday, a day linked more closely than I could ever tell with Karl. Our life and work and love. If I had looked forward from one happy birthday I had and seen what was ahead, how it would be with me now. I never could have gone on. We go on by not knowing what is waiting for us, and day by day we bear what we would have said. Looking ahead, we never could endure, and that is human life. I have been so lonely today that I must write this little word to one who will understand. I turn to you as one close to us in those dear days, one who cared for and appreciated Karl, understood something of the kind of love that was ours. Doctor, it was so wonderful that it seems to me sometimes the universe must have existed through the centuries just that our love might be born. I think of it as the one perfect flower of creation. I want you to know that I have come to see the worth, pricelessness of my memories. Karl's love for me lights up my life with a glory nothing can ever take away. I think we do not have even our memories until we have earned them. I have tried to come back to my own, to take my place. I am trying to be of that great harmony of the world in which Karl and I believed. And as my spirit turns from discord and seeks harmony, I am given my memories, the memories of those many perfect days, and I am never too lonely nor too desolate to thank God that to me was left the scent of the roses. Oh, Doctor, where is he now? Do you ever think of all that? No one who has ever loved and lost can remain secure in his materialism. I begin to see that the beautiful thoughts, the poems, of immortality, eternity, of all its coming right, have sprung from the lonely hearts of great lovers, for they would not have it any other way. They could only endure it by having it so. And, Doctor, far greater than any proof of science or logic, is there not proof in this? Lifting up their hearts in hours of desolation, were not the men and women born for great loves and great sorrows granted a vision of the truth? We do not know. None of them know. We hope and wait and long for the years to tell us the truth. And while we wait and hope, we work and try to make our lives that which is worthy our love. That endeavor and that alone makes life bearable. After a year of silence he received this letter. Doctor, it is finished. I will not tell you the things they are saying of it here, for you will read it in the papers. The papers are full of it. I think I have never seen so much about any picture. But it is more important that I tell you this. They are seeing it, even now, as I intended it should be seen. A work of love, a memorial, an endeavor to make it right for him. I have cared more for what the scientific people, Karl's own kind, have said of it than the artists. They claim it as their own. They say they are going to have it, get it some way, must have it. Do you not see how that means the fulfillment of my desire? Of course you know that it is a picture of Karl, but the critics here call it less a portrait than the incarnation of an idea, light and truth sweeping in upon a human soul. One of them expressed it. But why try to tell you of that? When you see it, you will understand what it is I have tried to do, and you shall see it soon. After it is exhibited here, they want it in Vienna, and I cannot refuse, for Karl loved Vienna, and then a short time in London, and then I come with it to America and to Chicago. I am bringing it home, Doctor, for even though it find final resting place in that great temple of science in Paris, I have the feeling, in taking it to Chicago, that I am bringing it home. And the first day it is exhibited there, I want you and me to go to it together, as Karl would like that we should. I am so tired that I do not believe I shall ever be quite rested again. For the last 3 months I have lived with the picture. My heart and mind knew nothing else. But the day I finished it, my strongest feeling was a regret that it was finished, a yearning to go on with it forever. For, Doctor, I painted my heart, my life, everything that I had within myself, everything I had taken from Karl, into that picture. I am lonely now without it, for it made my life. It has revived Karl's whole story. They tell it here, oh so lovingly. I heard one man from the Institute telling it all to a younger man as they stood before it yesterday. I have moved them to a new sense of Karl's greatness. It has been my glorious privilege to perpetuate him, make sure his place, reveal him, for that is what I have sought to do. Was not life good to me to give me power to do that thing? We shall be together in Chicago very soon, you and Karl and I, for as the days go on, Karl comes closer. I hope, most of all, that the picture will bring him very close to you. That was 3 months before, and today he had this note from her, dated Chicago. Yes, I am here, and the picture is here. The public exhibit does not open for a few days, but the picture will be hung this morning, and we may see it this afternoon. I shall be there at 3, waiting for you. End of Work the Saviour. Chapter 43 of The Glory of the Conquered. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kathleen. The Glory of the Conquered by Susan Glaspell. And there was light. He spent the intervening hours restlessly. The hands of his watch moved slowly. His duties occupied only a small portion of his mind. He was at the Institute at just 3, and they directed him where to go. His heart was beating fast as he walked down the corridor. The hand which he laid upon the doorknob shook a little. He opened the door, and a woman came toward him with outstretched hand. It was Ernestine, but the 3 years had done much. Older, greater, a more steady flame, a more conscious power, grief transmuted to understanding, despair risen to resolution. She had gone a long way. He looked at her in silence, reading, understanding. It was all written there, the story of deep thinking and deeper loving, of battles and victories, and other battles yet to fight, the poise which attends the victor. Yes, she had gone a long way, and as she spoke his name, and smiled a little, and then could not repress the tears which his presence, all that it meant, brought, he saw, shining through her tears, that light of love's own days. She turned and walked to the other side of the room, and he knew that she was taking him to the picture. She watched his face as he took it in, and she knew then that she had done her work. For a long time he said nothing, and when at last he turned to her, eyes dim, voice husky, it was only to say, "I can say nothing. There are no words." He turned back to the picture, she standing silent beside him, reading in his face that with each moment he was coming into more perfect understanding. For she had painted Karl's face as it was just before he went into the silence. She had caught the look which illumined his face that day on his deathbed, when she told him what she had done. She had painted Karl as he was in that moment of perfect understanding, the joy which was uplift, the knowledge which was glory. She had perpetuated in her picture the things which Karl took with him from life. It was Karl in the supreme moment of his life, the moment of revelation, transfiguration, the moment which lighted all the years. It was triumph which she had perpetuated in the picture. She was saying to the world, he did not achieve what he set out to achieve, but can you say he failed when he left the world with a soul like this? He saw that it was what she had done with light which made the picture, from the standpoint of her art, supreme. The critics said that no one had ever done just that thing with light before, painted light in just that spirit of loving and understanding it, less light, indeed, than light's significance. They said that no one before had painted the kind of light which could make a blind man see, for he was blind. The picture told that, but it seemed no one had ever had light quite as understandingly as he had it there. "You feel it, doctor?" she asked at last timidly. "You see it all?" He nodded. It seemed so far beyond any word of his, but she wanted to talk to him about it. "You see what it has meant to me? Why I loved it and lived for it? Oh, doctor, I wanted to show that he was greater than all the great things he sought to do. The night this picture came to me it set my blood on fire, and at no moment since, no matter how tired or lonely or discouraged, have I lost my love for it, belief in it. It seems so right. It seems to stand for so many things. They call it a masterpiece of light, and isn't it fine, great, right? That Karl's portrait should be a masterpiece of light. For a long time he was lost to it. It was as she said, right. To the blind man had come the light, to the man of science the light of truth, and to the human soul, about to set out on another journey, had come the perfect understanding of what had lighted the way for him here. When he turned to her at last, she was looking at the picture with such love in her eyes as he had never seen. Her lips were parted, tremulous. There were tears upon her cheeks. Her whole face quivered with love and longing. He saw then, in that one glance before he turned away, that time and death held no sway over such a love as this. "I did not mean to," she faltered, "but I have not seen the picture myself for a long time, and your being here—" She broke down there, and he summoned no word with which to answer her sobs. Dr. Parkman, raising a passionate face, "I want you to know that if this were the greatest picture the world had ever seen, if it were 1,000 times greater than anything the world had ever known, I would throw it away, obliterate it, gladly, joyously, for just one touch of Karl's hand." "Yes," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "And if you were not like that you never could have done it. What it cost!" he heard her whisper. "What it cost!" He told her that it had never been so, that the great things were paid for like that, that so many of the things which had lived longest and gone deepest had come from broken hearts and souls tried almost beyond their power for suffering. He told her that the future would accept this, as it had the others, without knowing of its cost, that a myriad of broken hearts had gone into the sum of the world's achievement. In the half hour which followed, as they sat there, speaking sometimes of Karl, more often silent, some things seemed to pass from the man's heart, other things to come, and as at the last he rose to go, for he felt she would like a little time alone, he said, and his face and his voice gave much which the words missed, "Ernestine, you have done more than you know. For me, too, you have made it right." She sat a long time before her picture, dreaming of Karl. She whispered his name, and he seemed to answer with, "Liebchen, brave Liebchen, you have been good to me." To her, too, the hour brought new light. It came to her now that she had won a victory for them, not because she had painted a great picture, but because she had brought them back to that world harmony from which they seemed for a time to have gone. She had won, not through the greatness of her achievement, but through having made it right with her own soul. The picture itself was a thing of canvas and paint. It was the spirit out of which it grew. His spirit and hers was the thing everlasting. She was sure that Karl, too, knew now that it was having the spirit right which counted. The perhaps of his letter was surely answered for him now. And out of this closeness to the past there opened to her a little of her own future, things she would do, for she must work. Theirs a love which made for work. There was much more to paint, much to show how she and Karl loved the world, what they held it worth, and all of it to speak for their love, glorify, immortalize it. She dreamed deeply and tenderly, the past so real to her, Karl, their love, so great. Now she must go. Tomorrow many others would come. Artists would come to pronounce her work good. Wonder how she had done this or that. Doctors and the university men would come, proud to speak of Karl, claim him as their own. But who would understand the tears and heart's blood out of which it had come? Who would know? Who could? Karl, she murmured at the last, eyes dim with loving tears. Dear Karl, dwelling with a long tenderness upon the name, did I indeed bring you the light? End of And There Was Light. End of The Glory of the Conquered by Susan Glaspell.